This is the third and final module in the MBA Essentials for Lawyers course. Once again, ask everyone after they put themselves on mute and stay on mute, just to start off with. But we are going to be having breakout sessions and workshops to make this as interactive as possible. Of course, please feel free to unmute yourself at any point if you have any questions. We also have time at the end for questions and answers. So what are we trying to achieve on this course? We'll provide you with an understanding of these core strategic models, tools, skills, and concepts that are at the heart of an MBA course, which you can very quickly and easily use to analyze any client, business, industry, market, look at how the marketplace is changing, but also use the same frameworks to analyze our own market and go on to develop the best strategies possible. And we'll look at 7 core frameworks in total on this course. We looked at 4 frameworks so far, have a recap of those in a few moments, look at 3 additional frameworks today. And one thing I really want to emphasize in today's session is the importance of continuing to revisit these concepts, reapply them to your clients or to your own business. We'll see today that no business, no law firm, no client can afford to rely on past success just to carry it into the future indefinitely. If it even attempts to do that, it almost inevitably going to decline and follow this trajectory known as the sigmoid curve. So we'll see today, in order for any business to be successful in the long term, has to reinvent itself at point A on the sigmoid curve rather than when it's saying disaster in the face at point B. And of course, this rate of change is increasing in just about every market, perhaps few more so than the legal marketplace itself. New technologies, Gen AI, clearly already start to have a transformative impact on the legal market. New types of competitors often driven by those new technologies, changing customer and client needs, clients becoming increasingly sophisticated and understanding what work can be streamlined and optimized through the use of these technologies, also looking for a more tailored, personalized service, so we'll come back to later on, changing working patterns, not just for lawyers, many clients themselves, working from home on a regular basis, hybrid working, something we'll again revisit a bit later on. Something for Reven's law, it's really just common sense. It says in order for any organization to survive and be successful in the long term, the rate of learning internally must be at least equal to the rate of change within the external marketplace in which the business operates. So we need to become a learning organization, understand how our own market and client marketplaces is changing, think how do we respond to those changes with well-developed plans so we can continue to grow for the future. And we'll be looking at this today in the context of the general layer or general environment. But before we do that, let's have a quick recap to see where we've got up to so far. So in module one, we started off with the industry layer, the industry environment, which says it's possible to analyze any industry by breaking down to the 5 component forces that determine its profitability, namely bargaining power buyers, bargaining power suppliers, rivalry among existing competitors, threat of new entrants, and finally threat of substitutes. So we said the inherent profitability of any industry is determined by how much profitability is bargained away by buyers as they push down prices, driving down profitability that way. We said this one tends to be at its strongest in those industries where buyers purely make the decision about who to buy from, purely on the basis of price. How much profitability is bargained away by suppliers that drive up the costs of the business? Here asking questions such as, is the business reliant on one or a few suppliers? Is dependent on a skilled workforce, remembering supply includes the supply of labor. We think about the competitors in the market. Who are they? How intense competition? What are we fighting over? We're talking about the existing competitors. We have to consider how difficult or easy it might be for new competitors to enter the marketplace. What's the threat of new entrants? As well as about the existing and potential competitors, are there any substitute or alternative products or services from other industries that provide similar benefits or similar outcomes? We said using the framework in this way is really useful when it comes to understanding why one industry, such as the soft drinks industry, is so much more profitable than the short-haul airline industry. However, moving forward, when it comes to developing strategy, we said we start to use more modern terminology, which encourages us to think about the nature and characteristics of these forces so we can go on to address them strategically. So moving forward, one thing about the bargaining power of buyers, I said from now on, we try and understand the characteristics of buyers. We usually now refer to as characteristics of customers. Ourselves these key questions: what factors are really important to the customers or clients when they choose who to buy this product or service from? Similarly, in relation to suppliers, what are the characteristics of those suppliers? Is the business reliant on one or a few suppliers? Is dependent on a skilled workforce to deliver this particular product or service? So in law, what level of seniority needs to be doing this type of work? In relation to competition, what's the nature of competition? Who are the competitors? Could provide a unique or superior product or service feature? How could we perhaps stand out from the crowd and differentiate ourselves from the competitors? In relation to threat of new entrants, what's the nature of barriers to entry? That will determine how difficult or easy it is for new competitors to break in. How important is reputation? Anything we do to boost their reputation and raise barriers to entry that way? And finally, what are the characteristics of these substitutes, or usually now referred to as characteristics of alternatives or replacement products or services? What benefits do they provide? Could we adopt some of the benefits, our own benefits, and those of the alternatives? And we said towards the end of module 1, certainly having gained an understanding of these industry characteristics, we're then in a position to identify the types of strategies we might be able to use to address them, selecting strategies from these 5 predefined lists. All too often we can rush in with the solution without actually understanding the nature of the problems. That's why we try to set up a step 1, understand these characteristics, and then start thinking about, okay, how do we address those forces strategically? Then in module 2, last week, we looked internally, said before we're really ready to identify the best strategies for a specific business within an industry, we need to understand where that business is positioned in the market in terms of the customer needs it seeks to prioritize. Something which can be diagrammatically represented by drawing a strategy canvas, where on the x-axis we set out all of the factors that are important to the customers, and the vertical or y-axis represents the level of investment in each of those various customer needs, where a high score, measuring any given need, means the business invests a lot in that need, that's what it prioritizes, with the one exception in price, high score, price, high price, low score means it's cheap. We looked at a few examples of this, of the hotel industry. These are some of the facts important to people booking a hotel room. Your 4 to 5-star hotel heavily invested in these needs, charge a high price. You want a 3-star, not so much, but at least they'll be a fair bit cheaper. But then we've got hotels such as Ibis globally, and what they say is for their target audience, people staying overnight on business or for wedding perhaps, it turns out they're not all that into great eating facilities because they're probably not going to be eating there, not into lounges and gyms, they just want a bed to sleep in for the night, but still want a good level of hygiene, good quality bed in a quiet room, but because they're not really investing much in these, they charge a price similar to the 1 to 3-star hotel. So strategy canvas help us think, well, who are our target customers? Which of their needs are we seeking to serve? What standard of work is deemed to be acceptable? What are you trying to prioritize within a market? Nothing in this example, or any examples we look at, as I said, was intended to suggest that one position is necessarily better than another. It's just we have to understand what the position is at step 2, before we identify the best strategies for that specific business. Step 3, identify its key assets at step 4. There was other examples of Nintendo, with Nintendo Wii Games console, focusing on the family audience, who didn't care so much about high quality graphics or complex games, wanted ease to play fun games that any member of the family can pick up. Looked at IKEA, tends to focus on younger furniture buyers who want style at low cost, wants to be able to take the furniture away with them the same day and do so cheaply, but don't care about the fact it's a limited level of customer service. And we said we could apply to the legal market where we'd narrow it down to a specific type of work. I think for that specific type of work, what are we prioritizing as importantly, not prioritizing? And so the line's going to depend on the work we choose to look at. A really useful tool before pitch or tender, a great way of communicating lots of information internally, ensure we're all on message, we're all on the same page. What do you think the client's really looking for in relation to this specific project or this type of work? So pause our force is step 1, strategy canvas step 2, and then and only then are we ready for strategy selection step 3. So we said we now use our strategy canvas as a guide to influence and cover our perspective in terms of which strategy appropriate for our business in addressing those industry forces. Selecting strategy from those 5 predefined lists that correspond to our industry forces. And then so at this point, we said, certainly having established the strategies that are appropriate step 3, we're then in a position to identify, well, how do we actually execute the strategies? Nice idea in terms of how we want to win customers or reduce costs or do something unique and so on. But what does that look like in practical terms in the form of assets? To do this, what physical assets, what plant, equipment, stock, premises, and what locations, what hardware, what vehicles do we need? What money do we need in the business? What knowledge, skills, talents of our people? What organizational assets? So we said what intellectual property and agreements with third parties. And then finally, what process, habits, routines do we have to have in place? So we looked at a thing called key asset map. We looked at 2 case studies on this. We looked at IKEA. We're focused on the supply strategy for that one, the great way of keeping their costs down, getting the customers to do some of the work for them. We said that was driven ultimately by these assets, well, some of these, sorry, not some, all of these, but there were more than these. We said, so design processes, flat pack modular design, ease to assemble, highly skilled furniture designers, huge stores, everything set out in a particular way, physical assets and space for parking, and so on. And we also looked at the legal market. We looked at a different supply strategy, namely, how do we ensure people are using their time as effectively and efficiently as possible, get maximum utilization of our most expensive assets, our fee earners, IT, support services, offices, and so on. I needed the breakout on that one. So 4 frameworks so far. So port our forces step 1, strategy canvas step 2, strategy selection in step 3, and the key asset maps and functional strategies step 4. And the final point I made right at the end of the last session is where business is selecting strategies that are consistent with their strategy canvas. It helps the business to ensure that where it would like to be positioned in the market, this represents our desired position. So we are selecting strategies that are consistent with where we would like to be positioned. It helps the business to ensure that where it would like to be positioned becomes where the business is actually positioned in the market as perceived by the customers, otherwise referred to as the brand identity of the business. All too often businesses select strategy that's actually inconsistent with their market positioning. and that they end up with a brand that does not match their desired position. So it's not a new framework, just a natural consequence of doing things that are consistent with our strategy. Where we'd like to be positioned becomes where the business is actually positioned in the market as perceived by the customers, otherwise referred to as the brand identity of the business. This is not a new framework, this is a natural consequence of us doing things that are consistent as step 3. If we're selecting the right strategies that are consistent with where we want to be perceived and therefore executing strategies, our desired position will become our brand identity. So far, so good. If the world never changed, a business could continue to pursue the same strategies in the same way, using the same key assets indefinitely. But we'll see today, well, of course, the world does change. From time to time, we see changes in economic conditions, fashions, taste, trends, laws, regulations, technologies. So you have to understand how we interpret and respond to those changes. That's what we're going to look at today in the context of the general environment. And in doing this, we're going to go through a further 3 steps, look at 3 additional frameworks today. So we've looked at the first 4, so portal forces, strategy canvas, strategy selection, our key asset maps and functional strategies. So step 5 is going to be how do we interpret the general environment, or more specifically, changes within it. So step 5 is all how do we interpret change within the market. And in looking at this, look at 2 connected models, something called the future 5 forces model, and its connected model, the future brand identity model. And this is where we'll look at the importance of continually scanning the general environment, looking for weak signals of changes as they begin to show up, so we can respond at the appropriate time on the sigmoid curve. So where we'll look at the sigmoid curve in a bit more depth. So by the end of step 5, we actually looked at all 3 layers: the industry layer, the industry environment in module 1, the internal environment last week in module 2, and the general environment at the start of this module 3. And then we went to think, how do we respond to these changes and build for the future? Not just to survive, business schools don't just exist to survive, but in order to prosper and grow. And in covering this, we're going to look at something called the resource-based view of change, or resource-based view of long-term strategy, it's sometimes called. But for our final step, our step 7, our corporate strategy, and frame with even stranger name, the sweet spot of opportunity. But this is really how we interpret change, these 2 together, how then we respond to those changes. So let's get started on today's content, so the general layer or general environment. So if you remember, very briefly mentioned the general environment at the start of module 1, it says it's made of all of those external factors that do not specifically sit within the business's industry, but that will still be extremely important for the success of the business. It's actually made up of a huge range of factors, more factors than the industry or internal environment. So here we think about factors such as, but not limited to, economic conditions, house price, interest rates, unemployment, fashions, taste, trends, demographics, attitudes to work, attitudes to free time, attitudes to ethics, attitudes towards the environment, politics, laws, regulations, technologies, and so on. And once again, then, because there are so many factors for us to consider, we need to use some sort of framework to help us conceptualize these factors, just to provide some sort of structure to our thinking in the development of strategy. And the next framework we're going to look at actually comes by a variety of different names, all of which are acronyms. If anyone's heard of an acronym that's used to capture these sorts of factors, please just type that into the chat. It might not be the same name I'm going to use. I say there are variations on a name, so it might not be the same name I'm going to use. But yeah, so if you're aware of any acronym that's used to capture those sorts of factors, just type that into the chat. So there are variations on the name, all of which are equally good. What I'm going to use, so you might have heard of a variation on this one, is a PEST framework. Something's called a STEP, something called PESTLE, a steeple. I'll come on to those variations a bit later on. We'll start off with the PEST, where PEST is short for political, economic, sociocultural, and technological factors. So the first thing to note about each of these 4 headings is they're much broader than their first sound. So political, as well as covering political policies and political processes, it also covers laws and regulations. So from now on, all laws and regulations will come under this very broad heading of political. Economic, this is broader still, so as well as covering factors such as economic conditions, interest rates, house prices, and general economic health. It also covers factors such as the infrastructure, in terms of road and rail networks, and the availability of natural resources. So the second thing to note about each of these headings, the first was they're much broader than their first sound. The second thing to note is that every country has a different general environment. Clearly, different countries have got different availability of natural resources, different economic conditions. Different political systems, different laws, regulations, and so on. S, sociocultural, this covers factors as fashions, taste, trends, demographics, attitudes to work, attitudes to free time, attitudes to ethics, attitudes towards the environment, Perhaps the broadest of all the four headings are that or economic, and finally T, levels of available technology. Sometimes see a PES referred to as a step, so the same factors but just in a different order, so sociocultural, technological, economic and political. And sometimes it's referred to as a pestle, so the same factors again to start off with, political, economic, sociocultural and technological. But this time the legal factors being extracted out of political and should be given their own standalone heading, the L for legal, and the ethical and environmental factors have been extracted out of sociocultural and be given their own standalone heading, the E for ethical and environmental. In fact, sometimes they separate out ethical and environmental under two separate E's, in which case there were three E's, economic, ethical, and environmental, in which case they call it a steeple. For any good at anagrams or countdown, you might work that out. But from now on, we're going to refer to this as a PES framework. For no other reason, this is one of the most commonly used names for this framework. But it makes no difference whatsoever if in the future you want to use a step, a PES, or a steeple, or any other name you can come up with. They all cover exactly the same set of factors on the right-hand side, albeit these factors might come under different headings. But it clearly doesn't matter which headings you use. The headings are purely to provide a bit of structure, nothing more than that. We'll get on to the clever bit in a minute or two's time. We've got to choose one, so for the purpose of today, we choose a PES framework. So moving forward today, laws and regulations will come under the heading of political, and ethical and environmental factors will come under the heading of sociocultural. And the third and final thing to note about these headings, the first was they're broader than they sound. The second one, every country has a different general environment. The third thing to note is they're all subject to change. Laws change, economic conditions change, fashion change, technology change. And of course, whenever we normally think about any kind of changes within the general layer, or more specifically within the political, economic, sociocultural, and technological factors that make up the general layer, we usually just think about those changes in terms of their direct impact on the individual business. We'll set this diagram out in a slightly different way in this way. So normally if there's a new law or regulation, which should for our purposes today comes on the heading of political, we usually think, well, how will this new law perhaps directly impact on the client, or the client needs to do to respond to comply with that change in the law. Similarly, economic change, a boom time, a recession, how that directly impact on the business, perhaps a recession, perhaps the business will have to restructure, cut costs in some way. Sociocultural change, fashions, taste, trends, how those directly impact on the business. New technologies, will the business need to adopt these technologies and integrate them into the overall business and so on, change workflow processes and so on. And of course, carrying out this exercise is going to be extremely important. However, and it's quite a big however, and forms the basis for the first half of this module 3, is one of the most important points on this course, if not the single most important point. In order for us to really be able to interpret changes that take place within the general layer from a strategic perspective, in addition to thinking about those changes in terms of the direct impact on the individual business itself, we also have to interpret them in broader, more relative terms, in terms of their impact on the business's industry, and more specifically on the 5 forces at work within the business's industry, which are of course characterized by Porter's 5 forces. So as we'll see through a range of examples, if there is a new law, changing government policy and so on, or changing government, there's always think about the direct impact on the client, now think about the impact on the client relative to his competitors, or it could be the impact on their suppliers, on customers. Could this raise or lower barriers to entry in the market? So for example, let's say a client marketplace is deregulated, all laws are stripped out. A client might say, yippee, less red tape for us to have to comply with. But of course, the downside to that is it lowers barriers to entry, perhaps causing heated competition. Or the flip side, let's say look at a fast growth market, something like fintech, and a new regulation's introduced. And the clients already in that space might say, what a nuisance, another regulation. But it might not be such a bad thing, it might put off new entrants, raising barriers to entry. What about laws impacting on the alternatives? These are often subject to very different rules and regulations. Look, these can look very different. We said, for example, one of the substitutes to an airline is video conferencing. A substitute to a vaccine might be a healthier lifestyle, depending upon the condition we're looking to treat and so on. So what rules are they subject to? How are things changing in that space? So look, think about these things. Similarly, economic change, a boom time or recession, how these play out in relative terms. This can be quite counterintuitive. Well, they all can, as we'll see. Change in fashions, taste trends, what will be the impact there? And technologies, we'll have the first break on this one. What historic examples of where they've lowered barriers to entry, introduced alternatives, reduced costs, and so on. Because as we will see, if we do not consider change in these more relative terms, we can very easily misinterpret the real implications for the purposes of the development of strategy. So actually going through each of these, starting off with economic, and working our way around political, around clockwise to political, where we'll start thinking about laws and regulations. Okay, so economic. So here, just with all of the changes are relative. So whilst, for example, most businesses will suffer during a downturn or a recession, some businesses will struggle more than others, and therefore business can often take advantage of an improved bargaining position relative to its industry forces as a result. So for example, a type of supplier often is harder hit than most during recession, where business get more for its money from that category of supplier. So just to rewind a minute, so suppliers are anything that drives up the cost of the business, we said in module 1, didn't we? It includes the staffing cost, research and development cost, the plant and equipment, any IP they're licensing, raw materials, anything that drives up costs will come under the heading of suppliers. So one category of suppliers often harder hit than most during recession might be a landlord. Business therefore can bargain down rent sometimes during recessions. Another type of supplier which is always disproportionately hard hit during recessions, a type of supplier would be an advertising agency. Of course, businesses tend to spend much less money on marketing and advertising during recessions, and therefore advertising agencies have to work much harder to fill TV slots and radio slots, newspaper space, magazine space, win internet campaigns. And consequently, business often get a lot more for their money from a supplier such as an advertising agency during a recession. So for example, during the 1990s, a recession gripped the US at the time, but in spite of that recession, Dell Computers famously continued to heavily invest in marketing and advertising, so taking advantage of those low advertising costs from that category of suppliers at the time, which in turn allowed them to gain market share over the two main competitors, who at the time were Hewlett-Packard and business called Gateway Computers. So when the market came back, they were then in a much stronger position. So how can we take advantage of an improved bargaining position relative to our industry forces even during a recession? And this concept then led the co-founder of Intel, a guy called Gordon Moore, to make the following point about recessions. He said actually 3 rules to recessions. They always end, you can't save way out of them. By that he means, well, there's always a financial risk of making an investment. Everyone's well aware there's a financial risk whenever you make an investment, but equally there'll be a competitive risk in not investing, in that some of the competitors will invest, and consequently then some businesses will emerge stronger than before. So of course, during a recession, business might have to make cuts in some areas, might have to restructure, but also remember the recession will come to an end, and yes, there will be a financial risk of continuing to invest in these potential future areas of growth. There'll be that competitive risk in not investing. And later on in this module 3, we'll look at an example of this. 2 different businesses in the same industry hit by recession responded in very different ways with very different outcomes. But the key headline point in this one for now is, whilst we're well aware there's a financial risk whenever you make an investment, we have to be mindful of the fact there'll be that competitive risk in not investing. As well as, of course, interpreting recessions in relative terms, we have to interpret any improvement in economic conditions in relative terms. So let's say there was to be a boom in the economy, generally, of course, a great thing, say booming economy. But you have to be careful as it plays out in some areas. So a booming economy can see our suppliers start putting their costs up. So the flip side to the previous examples, employees perhaps demand on their pay packets, raw material costs go up, perhaps our marketing and advertising costs go up during boom times and so on. Something else that can happen, new entrants find it easier to raise finance during booming economic conditions. There's more money flowing around, people looking to invest their money during these boom times rather than going to safe havens such as gold and so on. And that can then lower barriers to entry in the marketplace, causing heated competition and so on. Okay, next then, sociocultural changes. This includes fashions, taste, trends, demographics, attitudes to work, attitudes to free time, attitudes to ethics, attitudes towards the environment. So sometimes due to a change in the social culture, a product or service all of a sudden becomes extremely fashionable. And the competitors within the marketplace will think, wow, this is great. Our marketplace is finally taking off due to this change in the social culture. But what can happen then is new entrants also find it easier to raise finance again, to break into this now new fashionable market, causing heated competition. This happened to Filofax in the 1980s. I don't know if any of you remember. Filofax, I've got an example in here, those bound personal organizers. So Filofax actually been established in 1921, quite a niche product, not that popular. But during the 1980s, there's a change in the social culture and the rise in what were referred to at the time as young urban professionals, or young upwardly mobile professionals, or yuppies, who, as it turned out, really loved personal organizing. So it looked like there's going to be this boom in demand for personal organizers. boom in demand for personal organisers. And file facts like this is fantastic. The marketplace is finally taking off due to the change in the social culture. What happened then was a load of new competitors such as WH Smith rushed to the marketplace. No. This is fashions, taste, trends, laws, regulations, technologies. So sometimes, due to change in the social culture, a product or service all of a sudden becomes extremely fashionable. And the competitors within the marketplace think, wow, this is fantastic. Our marketplace is finally taking off due to the change in the social culture. But what can happen then is new entrants also find it easier to raise finance, to break into the market, causing heated competition within the industry. This happened to Filofax in the 1980s. Then, if any of you remember, Filofax are those bound personal organisers. I've got an example in here. Filofax has actually been established in 1921. Quite a niche product, not all that popular. But during the 1980s, there's a change in the social culture and a rise in what were referred to at the time as young urban professionals or young upwardly mobile professionals or yuppies, who, as it turned out, really loved personal organisers. So it looked like it was going to be this boom in demand for personal organisers. Okay, so perhaps some of you never saw what your typical 80s yuppie look like. There's your typical 80s yuppie. It's very busy, some might say self-important individual. Got all this information to deal with, what to do with this data. You couldn't store on your phone back then. That would be ridiculous. Phones were making phone calls. So to do all this information, you use your file of facts. So file of facts is short for file of facts, which is relevant to this course, but others quite interesting. So file of facts list is fantastic. The marketplace is finally taking off. What happened then was a load of new competitors such as WH Smith rushed into the market their own version of the personal organizer. These are generally better run businesses selling cheaper products with more innovative features, inbuilt calculators, if any of you remember those, causing huge amounts of competitive rivalry within the market. So paradoxically, this boom in demand for personal organisers during the 1980s almost put Filofax out of business. They survived, but they did not benefit in the way you might feel they should have done. So the else that happened during boom times, our supplies now become proportionally more scarce. Perhaps we find it hard to get hold of all the raw materials we need, all the skilled employees we need. Remembering supply includes supply of labour, again, driving up salaries, driving up costs, driving down profitability. Next, technological facts. You're going to be thinking about this one in the next breakout. When I normally do the live session, you'd be thinking about this in the breakout. So what I normally do is put people into breakout groups where people come up with a number of examples of historical or current examples where technological factors disrupt each or any of those industry forces. So, for example, I can think of any examples where perhaps a new technology allowed a business to reduce its cost, perhaps reduce its reliance on its workforce. Perhaps we're seeing that at the moment, of course, with AI. We've also seen this historically with automated manufacturing plants, those sorts of things. Sometimes one technology gives one competitor a huge lead within the market. We saw this in the mobile space where Nokia, BlackBerry had been the dominant players. Then Apple comes on with smartphone, touchscreen interface, followed by Samsung and so on, heavily disrupting that market. Perhaps the best example of this one, though, where technologies introduce all sorts of new substitutes, alternatives, so streaming replacing video hire, also Spotify, iTunes replacing music stores. And we've seen that phones replacing all sorts of things, replacing our cameras, replacing GPS, handheld gaming devices, music players, all sorts of interesting things there. Sometimes they can lower barriers to entry in the marketplace, just make it even easier for new entrants. We've seen this in terms of just trade people using eBay Marketplace or Amazon Marketplace, not needing a high street presence and so on. So also some other examples, this one, and then perhaps price comparison sites having impact on customers, but there are hundreds of examples for each of these in reality. And finally, political, which of course includes laws and regulations, but there's a bit of a backstory to this particular one. So when Porter's 5 Forces was first being developed at the end of the 70s and start of the 80s, a number of academics said that Michael Porter had in fact got this wrong, and that there should in fact be a 6th force, namely political, government, laws, regulations. Of course, whenever we normally think about any kind of change in the law, we usually think about the direct impact on the individual business and think how should the business respond to comply to that change in the law. However, more recently, Michael Porter and other academics have said, well, actually, this is the wrong way of thinking about it. This is not a 6th force. There are indeed just 5 forces. Generally accepted now, this is not a 6th force. There are just 5 forces. Because what they said was, yes, of course, we have to think about how a law impacts on an individual business, but we already do that for all of the PES facts, have to think about how economic change and social culture and technological factors directly impact on the business. But in order for us to interpret any of these changes, including a change in the law from a strategic perspective, we also think about these things in more relative terms. And this is what Michael Porter said about this particular point. So government is not best understood as a 6th force because government involvement is neither inherently good nor bad for industry profitability. The best way to understand the influence of government on competition is to analyse how specific government policies affect the 5 forces. For instance, patents raise barriers to entry, boosting industry profit potential. Conversely, government policies favouring unions may raise supplier power and diminish profit potential. Bankruptcy rules that allow failing companies to reorganise rather than exit can lead to excess capacity and intense rivalry. Government operates on multiple levels with many different policies, each of which will affect structure in different ways. And I'm going to end